Hey, this is the Lambda Cartel. I am your host, Pablo Rivera, and with me is Adam Wright and Mitchell Tilbrook. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Doing well.
Yeah,
How are you?
good.
I'm doing great. So today we're going to be talking amongst the many subjects that we always cover. We're going to be talking about Docker, and we're going to be talking about what makes a bad developer. Yesterday, we had a very nice Twitter conversation about what makes a bad developer. Before we get into that and start arguing like people were doing on Twitter, let's let's talk about Docker. So we started using we introduced Docker on Project Nikeza, and I've been toying with the MS SQL image on top of Docker on my Mac, and I gotta say it's been pretty nice. So what do you think about Docker? And I think it was Mitchell who introduced it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
can you explain why you use Docker with .NET Core?
Well, so I know Scott's like very much into like the Windows and Visual Studio, but I'm also on a Mac, and I wanted a nice environment which I could rely on to be consistent. And I was like, okay, so what's the only thing I know that can do that? I'm like, well, Docker. I'm like, oh, cool. Well, Docker and .NET Core work together, so let's go for that.
Okay. And I mean, you're absolutely right. I also run a Mac, and Docker does provide that for me. I mean, just being able to install MS SQL on a Mac on top of Docker, that blew me away. That was pretty cool.
Yep.
It's not something I would have expected to be able to do like a couple of years ago. I mean, this feels a little bit like like a fairy tale of sorts, being able to even run .NET on a Mac without Mono. So like golf clap to Microsoft for doing that. And so, Adam, are you new to Docker, or have you used it before?
I picked it up in a few days. Honestly, I'm very new to it. It took me a little bit of time to figure out, but I think it's really a neat tool. I wanted to be kind of like you guys. I know you guys use a Mac, so I didn't go out and buy a Mac or anything, but I did install an Ubuntu VM, so I could kind of sort of be in your universe or whatever, or a little bit closer to what you guys are doing. And then I pulled down, Docker and the Linux images for .NET Core and started learning them. They have some really good resources just on the Docker Hub site where those images are stored, showing you how to build things and do all kinds of things. Learned a ton about how the layering works. And I just thought that was really neat, how it works. Also, you can run Linux Docker images on Windows if you have the Docker installed with the Hyper-V. So I figured everybody could use that to do their coding, debugging, and all that kind of stuff. So that was my motivation too, is just everybody on the same kind of page and running the same builds and running the same everything. So I'm not sure that Scott has gotten there yet, but he'll get there. So
yeah, I think I'm with you guys. It does provide a good, at least so far, it has provided a good, like platform for everybody to be on equal terms. Scott has mentioned that he doesn't.
I don't think he understands what it is. I think we're losing Pablo.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Scott Nimrod, another member of the Lambda Cartel.
Lost you for a couple minutes, couple seconds.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're trying to say that Scott doesn't know what Docker is.
Focusing on on Microsoft, and I'm sorry, focusing on Windows. And he's like, why do I need this? Why do I need this complexity? Why do I need that? And for people who've worked on various operating systems, you know, if you work on something aside from Windows, then you know how painful it is to try and get things to work at least somewhat similarly, you know, amongst different platforms. The fact that Adam just mentioned running Ubuntu on Ubuntu VM on Windows. I mean, I think you mentioned that this is the first time you ran Ubuntu. Is that true?
Seriously, yeah, like actual diving the whole way in and trying to use it for everything. Yes. I mean, I've played with it in the past, but not like seriously. So,
so I mean, since we're talking about Docker, and you bring up Ubuntu, I feel like I'm obligated to talk about the Windows subsystem for Linux, or the
Sure.
Linux subsystem for Windows. I don't know. Like, I know there's one approach they hate. If you like,
It's
they have a
WSL. So
yeah,
you're right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you put Linux before Windows, Microsoft gets angry. But if you put the other way around, they're okay with it. So you think how do you see that play out in relationship with Docker? How do you see that working out?
I haven't played with that mainly because I didn't have enough hard drive space, and I didn't know if I could install that somewhere else.
I don't think you can use Docker with the subsystem either, because at the moment the subsystem, I think, is still not a full implementation. I think there's still things missing, and some of them, because Docker relies on the process, a bunch of process isolation stuff that's in the kernel, and I don't think either that or something that depends on is not in the Windows subsystem for Linux yet.
I don't know what this means, but it's user mode is supposedly what they've implemented. So I don't. If you need some kind of kernel thing, it probably doesn't exist.
Yeah, I don't know how it works. Like, I have a vague understanding. I think it's doing like a POSIX redirects to the Windows or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's some black magic going on under the hood. Definitely, or how Odie says, wet magic. It's very interesting to be, that we are in this place right now. That, and for me, as being someone who traditionally has not been very pro Microsoft in any way, or Windows, it's weird, having or being able to have to pull code from GitHub that's MIT licensed from Microsoft. I mean, it just blows me away. And having Linux inside Windows, and having Docker, and being able to just, I mean, I feel like I'm just in it, like I'm tripping in some way. Like, this can't be real. And that's, I think, the beauty of Docker, and the whole approach that the whole industry is taking, because like people started to realize that we're not going to progress if there's no sense of being able to work nicely with others, and even Docker itself, it's built on a language, it's built with the Go language, a language by Google. So there's a lot of like mixed in things that are just coming along together to provide us with a good environment. And so what do you guys see in the future for Docker? How do you see this playing out? Because there is definitely competition from the likes of like Kubernetes, and which is Google's approach to containers and all that stuff. How do you see this playing?
So Kubernetes isn't a replacement for Docker. I think Kubernetes originally had its own container system, which was a proprietary thing that Google had internally. But I believe when they wrote Kubernetes, they kind of wrote it with the intention to use things like Docker.
Yes.
And like the reason why it's called Kubernetes and has the logo of a helm is kind of in line with the Docker theme of the nautical kind of stuff. So it's I think Kubernetes like means captain or something. So it's the captain of like all the containers. So yes, developers and puns.
So the platform for platforms.
Yeah. So Docker at its core, and the thing I use it for the most, is creating effectively what are these isolatable processes that you can run. So you can bundle all your binary dependencies inside this container, and from all external point of view, the container is just another process on the kernel. So what Kubernetes does is Kubernetes is more about the scheduling of these processes and the managing of them, and it will do this in a distributed manner. There's a few other things it does, like Kubernetes has this concept called pods. So often in Docker, the idea is that because each container gets run as if it were a single process, the processes tend to be very specific in what they're doing. So you tend to only do maybe one, sometimes two or three things, but generally one thing with a container. And then if you need another service like a database container, there's a bit of debate on whether you should actually run databases and container in production. But if you need other processes, you have another container run that process. So this is fine in development, but when you get into like a large scale system, and even when you get into distributed systems, this becomes a bit more complex. So what Kubernetes has is this thing called pods, where you can deploy codependent processes. So you'll process like your application, it will a kind of micro database process, and you can deploy them together in these pods. And so the pods will kind of always be deployed in groups. That way they're all co-located and they can access each other very quickly.
All right. I mean, yeah, you've cleared that up, definitely. So, but you mentioned using Docker. I mean, it seems that it's part of your development, approach. Have you been using Docker for a while?
Probably for about 2 years. So I kind of really pushed Docker at my last workplace because we had a bunch of PHP backend stuff, and I didn't want to have to install PHP on my computer. But
sorry. Oh my god. Oh my god. I'm sorry to any PHP developer.
There was also some other problems where PHP has this like package manager called Compose.
Yes.
And for a while there was a memory leak in it. And I think the memory leak only affected Mac computers. And it wasn't a consistent memory leak. Like you'd restart your computer and it'd be fine. And it only affected me half the time and one other person half the time. But the main PHP person, it never affected him. So I don't know what version he was running. But as soon as we put together a build container in Docker, I could be like, okay, Docker, you're responsible for getting the dependencies and building the dependencies. So we never got to production with the stuff because I left that position before that ever got rolled out. But for the development environment, our entire developer ecosystem was inside a container. And this is wonderful because all the source code you can just kind of volume mount in. So if you're not familiar with Docker, volume mounting is when you kind of pass the whole directory into the process and give it access. And so we could still use all our really nice IDE and really nice tooling outside of the container, and then have the container run all the build tools and all the kind of development environment.
Okay, so have you ever pushed like a project to production with Docker?
No.
So this is gonna be, this is gonna be really interesting. Like pushing Nikeza out, because I haven't pushed a Docker project to production either, and I haven't pushed a .NET project, a .NET Core project, ever. And the last .NET project I pushed, I was using Visual Studio 2005. How do you see security playing out? How do you, from your experience, from what you read, I mean, how do you think security is going to play out?
I don't know about security, because security is a very kind of wide target of topic. In terms of deployment, Azure, Amazon offer services where you can deploy containers, and setting up like a VM in any of the cloud providers that's container friendly is pretty trivial. I believe the Google Cloud Engine now supports containers, so you can probably just
yeah. sorry Google. I don't like GCE.
They've apparently done a lot of work to make it really nice. So I think they're using Kubernetes behind the scenes on it. So using Docker containers as Cloud Engine might actually be a good experience now, as opposed to what it was kind of before, which was a bit more like what I guess people kind of use Lambdas like now. I use it for side projects, so take the mountain of salt that statement is.
Yeah, I've never met anybody who uses it on production.
In terms of deployment, the deployment's not too bad. Like all the containers we have at the moment probably aren't what you'd end up pushing, because in Docker, you tend to, in your development process, you tend to have a build image which produces your runnable artifact. So, and the .NET Core Docker images are set up in a very nice way for this. So when you pull down the Docker image that has the suffix SDK, that has all the build tools and everything kind of bundled in there. And I think that's like an extra 600 meg. So I think it's like 800 megabytes for the build variant. But then if you want a Docker container which just executes the image, I think it's like 200 megabytes.
Yeah.
So it's 600 megabytes lighter, and all it can do is you can go .NET run, and that's about it.
That's something I noticed, like the extra amount of space Docker adds to the whole workflow. And I know Adam brought it up. He mentioned like I'm running out of space with the Windows, the WSL. So Adam, like now that you would be installing the MS SQL Docker image, do we need to like do a Kickstarter to get you a new hard drive, or how are you looking space? Because it's 2 gigabytes.
Oh, that's fine. I was just saying, I have 2 different drives. Obviously, the primary drive has Windows on it, and Windows takes up a lot of space with all the development tools and things like that. And so my VM is on a different hard drive. That's all I'm saying. So, so I didn't want to put WSL and try to get Docker running in WSL on that drive because I thought it would take up too much space. So that's all. That's why I didn't know if I could put WSL on another drive. So that's why I just went with the Ubuntu image, and I was like, this will work fine. So, and it is working fine, and I get full access to Ubuntu. So
that's gonna be interesting, like being able to run Docker on top of WSL, and I mean just like it's like a container on top of that container on top of that container. It's gonna be like that saying turtles all the way down, but except containers. Like it's like Windows might turn into the Tupperware of operating systems.
Sure.
Thanks to WSL and Docker.
Well, I'm pretty sure like Hyper-V allows you to do Hyper-V inside of Hyper-V or whatever, stuff like that, or inside of images inside of Hyper-V. So it's kind of crarazy.
I've managed to stay away from sysadmin stuff, but all of that, and that's something I've come to realize. Like we are like the whole industry is working very hard to remove the sysadmin from the process.
Sure.
And Docker is definitely a tool that not aims to do that, but it's a side effect. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, because we need sysadmins.
I think they're just going to get different roles or have different jobs, learn different things or be more focused on different things. So
yeah, like Docker's still not simple, and like deployment and management of containers is still it's probably made the process more complicated. So in some ways, you may have more positions for managing the things.
Right. That's good. So how do you guys see like Docker breaking into the .NET shops, right? Because I mean, we are working with .NET technology, and how do you see companies and development houses, agencies adopting Docker in I mean, I guess in the coming 5 years? Like, how do you see that playing out?
I think people like Mitch will start introducing it into their companies and saying, "Hey, we should do this, and here's why." but I want to talk about this also. There are Windows containers. I know you guys probably aren't really Windows people, but that to me that's a huge deal too. Just taking your legacy stuff and be able to wrap it up in a container and run it on a cloud somewhere. I think that's a big proposition for people as well. I don't know.
Yeah, I tried to install the Windows Server Nano, and they complained I had the wrong operating system.
It's not the wrong one. You're just not paying them enough money.
Well, it's the wrong one for Nano.
No, but that's good. I mean, the whole .NET Core approach of being open, I think that's going to give Docker a good vector into the .NET community and ecosystem, because suddenly you have someone who has vast amount of experiences with .NET, like Adam and Scott and Odie as well, and then you have people that have worked with it, and they know what's up, right? But they've been working on other technologies, and allows to sort of mesh people into one place. And can we call Docker the meat grinder of development? Like let's put everything together and let's see what comes out the other side. That's a really, really, really bad example, but kind of felt like that. I mean, with Mitchell's explanation of Docker and Kubernetes, which by the way was spot in. I mean, it was so good. My reaction was just awful, and I apologize for that, Mitchell. But all of these things, all I'm thinking is that it is exciting to be involved and working with Docker, even though it might feel like you are late to the game, right? Because it's been a couple of years since they started, developing it. But I think right now, I think it is the time to get started with Docker, because, it's mature enough to not suck a lot, but it's not adopted very widely by the whole industry yet, and so it might give you a competitive advantage.
I don't know. I think Docker is pretty widespread at this point. Maybe not so much in the .NET ecosystem, because this .NET Core is still seen as baking. Like I go to a few of the user groups and people say, I'm not sure if .NET Core is ready, and
they say like Silverlight
SDKs.
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly. I never really used Silverlight. I kind of was confused by it. I'm like, but I can't inspect. I can't like debug.console and the. It's like, but like, yeah. What was I saying? Oh, right. Yeah. So .NET Core 2, I think, is the one that people are really looking forward to because there's a lot of features that people depend on that are not in .NET Core 1. And .NET Core 2, from what I understand, is bringing a lot of those features in. Like, I think we were saying in a previous episode that like type providers don't work in .NET Core, but .NET Core 2 might have support for them.
Has been a very painful process of dealing with .NET Core, and I mean, not that I'm criticizing their development team. I mean, what they are doing is a huge undertaking, and you got to take baby steps. But it's been painful, but I think we're gonna come out ahead.
Yeah.
In one way or another, just because we're being very early with it.
You can do 80% of the things you want. It's just that last 20% of stuff that you can't do that people are still using.
Yeah, I mean, death by 1,000 paper cuts. That's one episode. I think that's episode 7 of our podcast. Like that's how it feels. That's how it feels. But hopefully and thankfully, Docker does provide a little bit of sanity to that. And using Docker with .NET Core, at least on my end, has been has been a good experience. I don't feel burned by it. I'm not angry. I don't throw my computer through a window, because it does make things like that. I have you guys leading the charge on that area. Allows me to see the example. So if you're a listener to this show, make sure to go to the Nikeza repo, which is on our GitHub, which is github.com/Lambda Cartel. And you will be able to see how we're using Docker. We're definitely still toying with it. We're figuring things out, but
you definitely need to explore the directories, because I kind of co-located the Docker files because I didn't want to deal with the relative path nightmare.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, learning process, and the good thing is that you can see how we're working with it, how we're adopting it. And I mean, we think there's something that we tend to think that our processes are unique to us, that whatever the development approach we use, it's unique, and that nobody makes the same boneheaded mistakes. But I mean, making boneheaded mistakes is the approach that a lot of teams out there have, because we follow this sort of discovery process through development. I mean, this has been my experience with Nikeza. Everything has been like going up a hill. Like, oh, I gotta learn this, oh, I gotta learn that, oh, I'm having a problem with this. And so it's good for people to see that out in the open, and so that they can feel better about their misery, about their about their processes. So Adam,
what's up?
From your point of view, Docker in the next 5 years, how do you see that playing out in the whole Windows ecosystem?
Well, I'm hoping that people start to use it for something, .NET Core or otherwise, and start to think that it makes sense, especially for the scenarios that Mitchell was talking about with just dev environments, like saying, or even you were talking about, like, hey, I need a SQL server. Cool, just pull it down, and I don't have to install this big giant thing. I could just pull down the image and run it, and it's going. And it'll probably have, all the schema that I need and all that kind of stuff, and maybe some test data and whatever, and just use it. I love that idea, instead of having to run a whole bunch of scripts and, and take however long it takes to download, install that thing. I love that scenario. As well as any other kind of services that need to run that you're dependent on. There's a lot of times today, at least in my experience, at some places, they're like, oh, well, there's this service over in dev, or this service. Just point to this service or that thing that you need as a dependency in some environment, and who knows when that thing's going to change. It's
yeah,
in constant flux or whatever. So just having a version of something that you want to depend on, or at least for development time, that you can just say Docker, pull that thing, and then run it. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I do hope that we could do those things in production as well. Again, so there's no ambiguity about what is where, and this is, as long as we're versioning things correctly and tagging them correctly with Docker and all that stuff, then we could know what actual things are in what environments and what the dependencies are and all those kinds of things. What unquestionably, hopefully, that's just a general problem we have anyway today. Is just knowing what is where and what versions and where the source code is and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that'll make it easier. But like I said before, I'd really like legacy projects, really like 10-year-old ASP.NET apps to run in Docker as well. I mean, things like build servers. People hate setting up build servers. And we pulled out a build server from Docker, cool.
Oh my God. Jenkins. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever set up a Jenkins server?
I have, yeah.
Oh.
So that's like the worst, right?
Bane of my existence.
So just those kinds of things, anything that you use all the time that you don't want to set up would be awesome. And you could share those things. You set up your Jenkins configuration, you could make it public. Anybody else can pull it down, So just any of those kind of things, that just being able to share stuff like that, I think is huge. So
yeah, and you brought something up that's, I think, very important. I think Docker is a Trojan horse for open collaboration. That's something that you don't get in a lot of companies. Like everything must be closed source and everything must be developed in-house, or it needs to have a license. Like we need to buy a commercial license. We don't use anything open source.
Right.
And so having Docker run this, what used to be closed source systems, like MS SQL, I think is very powerful and gives different markets and ecosystems the ability to introduce new things and bring some little like a little bit of modern approach to their old systems. Because what you said about old ASP .NET or even ASP legacy systems using Docker to be deployed, I think that's huge itself.
Yeah.
Just like have that within that image and not have to worry about where's this thing set up, or not even having to worry about calling the guy or the person who set that up, who is no longer with the company, or like
so the other thing you get with Docker containers is the environment is contained, so you don't have to you don't have to worry about, oh, I'm running on this host, oh wait, somebody changed the config file over here, crap, something's going to be broken, or I need this patch or whatever. Those kind of things. This is exactly the same every time. If you want to upgrade your base image that has some other patch, great, you can do that. But you can test it that way before you even put it in production. So the whole thing is in this one image, which is really, really ideal as well. So stuff isn't changing out from under you in any environment. You're just pushing that exact thing somewhere. So that makes sense.
Okay.
And that's great for legacy stuff, right?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, like people think that software development is 90% greenfield projects.
Right.
But no, like
Right.
you're going to be somebody else's code.
Oh, absolutely.
And you know, you're going to discover that whoever set up that code, or I mean, it happened to me a couple of years ago. I'll give you a real example. I don't know if this applies to Docker, but I was working at a company that was very mobile, was very focused on mobile development. And I was working on an Android application. And this was way before Android Studio existed. This was when you had to use Eclipse with the plugin. Yeah. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Oh, it took me, believe it or not, 3 weeks to set up my environment with the people who set it up originally, because they didn't remember things, they didn't document it. The application was being actively developed, and so things were continuously being added, and I mean, they had a very messy approach, and it took me 3 weeks, and it just left a very sour taste in my mouth. And so every time I think about that, I'm like, we need simpler tools. I believe in small and having small and tidy tools that allow us to just do one thing and do it properly and just forget about everything else. I think Docker just fits into that description. And with that in mind, with that beautiful development process that Android application had, let's talk about the main subject, because I thought we were going to talk. I mean, in my head, I had this idea we are going to talk about Docker for 5 minutes, but we ended up talking about it for about 30 minutes because Docker, I mean, and I'm happy about it, because Docker is a wonderful piece of technology that I think it's going to open many doors, not only for us, but for companies out there. But we were, the main subject or the main theme of this podcast was, is the question, what makes a bad developer? And this is something that came up yesterday on Twitter. Scott Nimrod and I, we were talking about the use of comments on a code base. Is that good? Is that bad? And that seems to be like a hot button issue for Scott. He was explaining to me that he thinks that comments are a bad signal, that there's a problem with the development methodology. And so that sort of played out into an internal joke. And then I made a question on the official Lambda Cartel account, like, what makes a bad developer? And we had an answer. We had a reply from somebody called Reed Evans, I believe it is. Let me just get that really quickly. That he said that bad developers are a result of a bad environment. And what do you think? Oh, okay, so his name is Reed Evans. All right, so he says that the environment, if you're in a place that always takes shortcuts, never try anything new, and that's all you ever see, that's the norm. So he was to provide some context, he was saying that bad developers, a lot of bad developers out there are bad because they work in an environment that promotes a bad approach to development. So what do you guys want? Number one, what do you think about that? And two, what do you think makes a bad developer?
I'll let Mitchell go first.
Throwing under the bus, right? Like
a little. I mean, the time to comment thing that you brought up. What makes a bad developer?
You can talk about the comments if you want.
Maybe in a sec, but like one of the things that kind of annoys me is this idea that this kind of people having this idea that something is correct and you can't contradict it. That's something I find really difficult. And
people who are hard-headed.
Not just hard-headed, but just like completely stuck on either an ideology or a concept. Was it when Facebook came out with React? Everyone, like the general public, was just kind of like, "Oh, this is disgusting. Why are you mixing your JavaScript and your markup?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a terrible thing to do." Like Facebook's like, "Oh, is it?" Because internally, everyone loves this.
Yeah, React does add that self-contained taste.
Yeah.
To JavaScript and HTML, because I mean, I think it's actually pretty genius. That was pretty genius.
Well, yeah, and it's like I never saw it as a problem. I don't know. Maybe I'm not old and bitter enough.
Not yet.
Ask me again in November. But was it now Angular, not Angular JS? I think that's right. So Angular is the one where it's version 2 and above. And I think it's like going to version 5 soon. Like you think Microsoft bad at naming things?
I did not say that, by the way. That was Mitchell. I'm sorry.
It's even worse. Like you try Googling it now, and it's just like, what am I looking at? But like even they're moving towards this kind of idea that you can have your JavaScript side by side with your HTML, because let's be honest, when you're doing web development, your JavaScript is so attached to what you're doing with the DOM. Like it's effectively you're doing DOM mutations of JavaScript. Like let's be honest, like there's no separation here. You're directly manipulating one with the other.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that people who are not open to having their and I'm going to quote Scott here, like their belief systems destroyed. That I mean, it might not generally make them into bad developer, because they might be very
that
very
might
smart.
Be intentionally trying to be very good as a developer, but by following these kind of cognitive biases, they're limiting themselves. So calling them a bad developer might be a bit kind of overtly negative. I suppose for this subject, they're kind of self-limited developers.
That's a good point. So we could say that a bad developer, and in the general sense, is someone who is not open to like shattering their ideas or their world views. And I can relate to that, because for me, I was, if it wasn't like I was pretty much anti-Microsoft, anti-Windows, anti.NET, anything. And I think that was making me worse than I actually am. And I mean, yes, I have a reason why I was that, right? And I mean, whatever, it's not important. But being closed, having a closed mind to new things and different things, and not giving people or companies the opportunity to show you that there's actually value in what we're doing, I think that does make for a bad developer. And because you stagnate, you don't grow, and you sort of stay within this mud puddle in your career. That's a very, very strong point. So how would you, Mitchell, what would you say to a developer who is in a bad environment, right? An environment that is not conducive to their growth, what would you tell them, right? Because because it's easy to label them as a bad developer, but they might be someone good. They might be a diamond in the rough that's just overwhelmed with really crappy processes and a really crappy environment. Like, what would you tell them?
Oh, that's such a loaded gun.
Well, I mean,
okay, let's roll with the assumption that we have someone who is willing to explore, but because of the ecosystem that they're in, they can't, and every time they have tried, they've been punished for whatever reason.
right. Someone who's hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The simplest solution is get another job. We live. We're in probably the most easiest to move between jobs environments ever, and like, I don't know, I have universal healthcare, but like, I imagine that software engineering jobs are well paying enough that it's something that in the US would be quite attractive. But let's not go that. That's the simplest solution. The other thing is, like, to ask the question of why they're there. And I think a lot of people, like, was it the whole thing of like the whole, like, the two birds in the bush thing.
Yeah.
And
it's hard to move from where you are to something new.
It's a lot of energy as well, because you're like, there's only two birds in the bush, so it's only twice as good. It's like, but if there's actually only just one bird or less in the bush, then the potential for gain isn't quite there.
Mm-hmm.
And software engineering pays well enough to the point of where the difference in salary doesn't really become a major factor for people's decision making. It's like, well, I'm getting paid 120 grand here. That place is paying 125. It's like, $5 grand.
Mm-hmm. So do you guys feel? Because I've seen this like firsthand.
I don't know how to go beyond the simple answer.
No, that's cool. That's cool. And I mean, I'm here to ask the tough questions, right? But I'm just trying to steer the conversation into try and discover this, because it's easy for you to say what makes a bad developer, right? And I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, because one, the environment plays a huge part in developers. Like, I've personally seen, I have a friend and ex-coworker who you could consider was average, or maybe less than average within that environment, become a superstar, like, the rock star / cowboy programmer. And I hate those terms, by the way, but the change of environment gave him a platform through which he could elevate his skills and showcase what he was really able to do. And I've seen it firsthand. So I'm trying to steer the conversation into discover ways or things that might let others realize that, hey, I'm in a toxic environment at work, because these things are not always very clear, right? You can be in a bad environment and not realize it, because it became the normal thing you do. And suddenly you talk with other people who work in better environments than you, and you're like, huh, like they like, you don't do quick fixes on production. You don't do that. You actually have you actually have a staging server, and you have code reviews, really, and you have to write unit tests. What are those? And so it's not completely evident to a lot of people out there in bad environments that they are in a bad environment. It's like, and you know, this is the worst analogy I can use, but it's like when there are people in abusive relationships, right? You might not notice that you're in an abusive relationship because you're being manipulated. And in the same way, you might not know that you're in a bad environment because you don't know what a good environment is, or you don't see the key elements to that. So Adam, let me give Mitchell a break because he is sweating. I could feel him sweating and he's hating me. I know.
It's like 32. I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some weird animal in the mail. He's gonna send me one of those killer animals from Australia. And let me just say that I'm saying that
you don't have to worry about it. Like like
it won't make it alive to Puerto Rico.
You don't even have to come to Australia to find deadly animals. Like one of some of our deadly spiders accidentally snuck into Japan, and they love it there.
Really? Well,
yeah, I think like the redback spider has become a bit of a nuisance there. Anyway, Adam.
But it's the stereotype of, like, it's the Australian stereotype. And I'm sorry I brought it up, but I mean, I don't know what you guys ever did to Darwin for him to like make animals evolve into those things over there. But you know, you better say you're sorry.
Yeah, it's a bad environment. So let's talk to Adam about what his views are.
So Adam, how do you feel about this bad environment being a bridge towards becoming a bad developer? How do you like?
So
like, give me your experience right there.
Let me make a bad analogy too. To me, if you start out in a bad environment, then you probably don't know you're there. So if like you're for, you know, just like if you grew up in a bad environment, you may or may not know it's a bad environment till you get older, you know, because you haven't seen anything else. So same thing with, you know, if you come out of college and you come to some job that does stuff like you said, like just, hey, we don't have source control, we change everything on this server here, and that happens to be production. You may or may not have the instinct to know, oh, that's a bad idea, or it's not right, you know, and like you said, until you learn that from someone else, or you read something and like, oh, you should really have these different environments that you run all your code through, and you know, you should use source control and agile. Just kidding. So I think that would be a problem and a potential product of that. But if you do have experience with, you know, good environments, good people, and what you think are good processes, you could probably recognize a bad environment pretty quickly if you go into a new job and they're not doing those kind of things. So the question I guess I would ask to some people is, if you do realize that you're in a bad environment, what do you do about it? I mean, to me,
wow.
So well, yeah. Let me tell you what I try to do. So most places I go have one or two things that are, you know, a little off or weird or whatever. And, you know, I try to pick one thing that I can put my stamp on and say, I'm going to help these guys get to this particular level of maturity in this one area, like say deployments or something like that. We need automated deployments. Cool. You know, you guys have been copying stuff all around everywhere manually all the time. Let's get to a place where you can just run a script or hit a button in a build server or whatever, and try to level up at least one area, and then maybe pick another one where I'm at. But if I get a ton of resistance to that kind of thing, then, you know, it's probably not going to stick around very long, if that makes sense.
No, so, absolutely.
So
yeah. And as someone who sorry, did I interrupt?
No, go ahead.
So you brought up, you know, you said like someone whose first experience was in a bad environment, they don't know what's better.
Yes.
You know, I can definitely relate with that, because as you know, well, people might not know, I don't have a college degree in computer science. Well, I don't really have a college degree in anything, right? So not anything at all, not even in astrology, right? And so the kind of opportunities that I was getting back when I started, you know, they were iffy at best. So I you know, like Drake says, the rapper, like started from the bottom. Like I had to start from the real bottom, and it took me a good amount of time to realize that what I was learning was actually setting me back. You know, like the way these people work, or the way those companies worked, was setting me back so much time.
How did you figure that out?
You know, it was by talking with others. So I realized that I was bad in a lot of ways, that the knowledge I had was bad. By talking with others, by I guess having that hunger to look for more, and sadly, I didn't have like a local network of developers that I could count on, so I had to go online and plead my case, and see, you know, what was wrong, because like, to me, I always felt like there was something off, but I just couldn't put my finger on it, and I didn't know if it was me that didn't have any professional experience, or you know, like the imposter syndrome kicking in, right? Or if it was the environment itself, because I started to code very early on, and I worked in, like, I was always coding when I was a teenager, and I was, you know, doing stuff, and, you know, all like throughout the spectrum of what you can do with software and code. But since I didn't have a professional experience, I had to work with other people, you know, in an environment where you had to ship code, because that was the money maker for the company. Like, I didn't know, and having that hunger to improve myself, having that drive to figure out if what I'm doing is correct, I think that's what prompted me to look for others, and that's actually one of my, I think that's one baggage I will carry for the rest of my life, and I think it's good. Like, one of the reasons be a part of the Lambda Cartel is that I could be with the likes of you guys, and learn from you, and absorb from you, and see your processes, and see your skills, and try and learn from you, because I'm always going to feel like I'm the guy behind the curve, and I have to, you know, I guess, play catch up a little bit, and that sort of motivates me to keep going forward and try and learn more. But this suddenly turned into a confessional. Oh my God. But I feel it's good to share this kind of things, because there's a lot of people out there who are in similar situations, and they might not be able to, you know, to verbalize, or to even, they, you know, they feel something is off, but they might not know what. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's like, I am Mitchell, I'm a bad developer.
yeah, I am Pablo. I'm worse
but like,
than you.
but it's, I suppose one of the other things is to think of it in the inverse, and to think, I'm a good developer.
Oh,
but
yeah.
is that true, or is that hubris? Because if you think you are a good developer, then the question of what I am doing is what I'm doing wrong might not come up. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That just occurred to me as an interesting question. Sorry.
No, true. So you might say, I'm a good developer, so I know everything, or I know the best approach. And I've personally fallen onto that. It's worse when you're in a position of power. Like I was a technical lead, and I had a short period of time where I was saying like, I'm a good developer. And so that played into my psyche, and made me approach like the team in a way that this person is not a good developer, they're a bad developer. Like how can I help them, how can I make them move forward? But I'm not the ultimate source of truth, right? And so me thinking that I was a good developer, quote unquote, was actually being the bad developer in the situation, because I was full of it, right? And there's no way around it. And so realizing these things, and not putting and not believing so much in yourself, I think you can still call you a good enough developer. I guess that's what I would do. I think you could call you a good enough developer if you feel insecure about, and not insecure, but if you have a certain amount of leeway or a certain about flexibility around your beliefs and around your experiences. Because that's, I feel that's what Adam was saying a bit earlier, like if you are able to provide some sort of flexibility into your whole belief system, then you're not necessarily a bad developer, but you're someone who is in a bad environment. So yeah.
So I'm curious. It seems like a lot of us are talking, and let's go back to the comment thing. And I was talking about change of code and production, all kind of stuff. It seems like we're measuring good and bad via the maturity of the practices that someone does, or processes that they use. Is that? But when I think of a good developer, I kind of think of it in a different way. I think of them as, those things kind of go along with it. But to me, a good programmer or developer or whatever is someone who cares about what they're doing, about their career, about learning, about teaching, about those kinds of things, rather than, do they rate comments in their code or not? So it's kind of, to me, it's a different measuring stick.
That's true.
In those kind of ways. So I guess you could have bad practices and still, in my opinion, be a good developer if you, are learning and teaching and, excited about what you're doing and care about your company or whatever you're writing and stuff like that. I don't know. It's kind of two different ways to look at it, I guess.
Yeah, true. And that's it's good that you bring that up, because you might have someone who's good, someone who has the approach, but they're stuck in an environment that nickels and dimes their ideas or their approach to writing code, right? You might have someone who's driven, someone who wants to grow, someone who really wants to become the best that they can be, but they are within an environment that is not conducive to that. And so it doesn't necessarily turn them into bad developer. They can still be, considered good. But, at the same time, maybe learn.
Okay, we lost him.
Yeah. He's in a bad connection.
Lost you for a few seconds.
Or only have with back.
So I guess I would define bad as the opposite, or not bad, and sadly probably more normal.
That's
he's still going. Sorry.
Well, I think it's coming through in chunks.
Sorry,
we missed you for a little bit.
You broke up for like a while.
See, It's the bad Google developers and Google Hangouts.
Yeah, that's what it is.
See, I'm never ever gonna work for Google because I'm always like busting their chops.
Yeah, you need to make your undersea internet cable shark-proof because we had to do that in Australia.
Really?
Yeah. Sharks. They discovered sharks would attack the underground sea cables quite violently, actually.
Oh my God. See, I mean, Australia's a beautiful place full of great people, but there's no way I'm visiting it. Like, that's what YouTube is for, right? if I feel like going to Australia, I'll just watch a YouTube video. It's like, I think it's like the Florida of the world. You know, it's full of killer animals. I mean, but anyway, let's not get sidetracked because otherwise I'm gonna spend 30 minutes ranting about all the animals that can kill you in Australia, including koalas, which I think, you know, I thought they were really nice animals.
But they're so lazy. They actually the backbone is actually got a curve, so when they sit in branches, they don't fall out. So they have a seat built into their backbone. That's how lazy they are.
Yeah, it's the Australian sloth. I mean, you guys have something for everything. I mean, there's like I said, Darwin just went crazy there. So we got like 5 minutes to go on this podcast, and you know, we talk about soccer. And go ahead, Mitch. Sorry.
We covered a few things. So there's good developers in bad environments. So that's something that probably does exist. So the comment before about bad developers are defined by their environment, possibly not. It could just be bad at this point in time. Like Adam said, he's been able to go into some places that didn't have the best practices, and there were good developers there who just needed someone to kind of come in and be like, okay, I can see you want to be good developers. Here's a path towards getting there. So potentially a bad developer is just someone who doesn't know the way. But that doesn't mean they're a bad developer. That just means they're being limited in some capacity, either by themselves or by the environment.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's
true. 5 minutes left. Why don't we talk about Scott's comment?
Yes.
All right. So for everybody listening out there, through our millions and millions of listeners, I mean, why do we even do this podcast? I'm kidding. So Scott Nimrod and I were on Twitter talking about yesterday. He sent out a tweet, and let me just get that tweet, right? Because I want to read it out loud. It's Scott. For those of you who don't know Scott is someone who he thrives on, you know, on becoming better. And so he is, I mean, he's one of the most driven people that I know. And he has he has very strong opinions because he's always been focused on developing himself and like sharpening his skills. So I mean, not to take anything away from him, right? So I'm not like trying to criticize or destroy him in any way. So he tweeted, I'm surprised how many professional, quote unquote, developers believe that commenting code is essential for code maintenance. And that was a trigger alert for me, right? That triggered me because I use comments. I've learned to use comments to guide me or to guide people around a code base, right? I don't use them to like, you know, like the typical bad comment, which is like you have a for loop and on top of it you have like, you know, looping through the elements. No, you know, if you have to explain what a loop is for, like you say, like, you know, need this to do X or Y, or explain very briefly why you're doing that there. That's it. And I mostly use comments to navigate a code base, right? Like sort of map that I can do control find, and I'll just go to there, and I can search for comments, and I have to provide context to the actual code base. So, and that prompted the whole. I mean, that prompted 2 videos from Scott, and actually this podcast. So, Mitchell, what is that you want to get off your chest, because you brought this up?
I was quickly trying to look up a JavaScript optimizer by Google called the Closure Compiler, where you would in the comments write the types that the function accepted and returned. So in that way, the comments are really effective because they allow the Closure Compiler to optimize your JavaScript. So having comments in the Closure Compiler for JavaScript is a really good thing.
So we need to make a show about comments. Is that what you're saying? Is the 10th episode of the podcast, will it be about comments? Like, are we in this Silicon Valley type scenario of tabs versus spaces? Is this real life? Is this reality?
Yeah, Scott's tweet is talking about, what was it? Professional developers need for code. He says it somewhere lower down here. It's like, he says something about like, why in a high level language would you need comments to kind of say what you're doing? And yeah, if you have a strong type system, you can get a lot of information from things, like especially if you name your types well. And I did bring up one thing where I think we did recorded a kind of, it was meant to be a session on trying to work out how to put unit testing into the YouTube API integration that I wrote. And we ended up just doing a code review. And Scott was like, oh, how does this work? And I'm like, I can't remember.
So comments keep you, so yeah. I mean, have you written a simple explanation
about why I did something? So
yeah.
I think he's justified in saying that you shouldn't need to write comments to explain how the code works, but I think comments explaining why you're doing things in certain ways, or if there's assumptions in your code, such as like the Google YouTube API always returns things in lists. And I think that's to give it a kind of homogeneous API so the types don't change. But what this means is that when you make queries which only return a single item, even though it's always going to return a single item, it returns it as a list.
Yep.
So once we worked it out, we ended up refactoring it so that we passed it to a function, and the function name was describing what we were doing. So the intent becomes semantically visible to someone reading the code. So you don't need the comments to explain what you're doing. But without that function, it took us a few minutes to work out what the intent was and why I was doing things the way I was doing them.
So do you think that adding a comment to the code base or to that specific part of the code that says that makes like YouTube always returns a list of items, on the API, do you think that would be worthwhile? Not comment the code, but
yes.
Like here's a heads up. If you're gonna work on this, you need to consider this. Do you feel that'd be useful?
Yeah, especially since the API isn't very kind of F# idiomatic. Because
let's not go into sharp idioms, please. That's horrible. Please. Sorry.
But if we make the assumption that you can produce more semantic code in F#, let's just make this an assumption for this case. then the comment becomes less possible, because you can use the type system to give more semantic meaning to both your types as well as the kind of functions that accept the types.
That's true.
But because we didn't have that, there's assumptions by the SDK in the way it will be consumed that are not necessarily clear unless you're reading the API documentation for it. So
Yeah.
in that, as I said before, in that situation, the comment would be helpful. We did end up refactoring it to the point of where the comment is probably not needed. If you wanted to really dig into the way we did things, the comment might be helpful. But in terms of understanding what my code was doing after refactoring, it was fine. And I think one of the other things that Scott was saying is that, if you do need to write comments, that's something that you need to come back and refactor. And I'm like, well, if that means that we can ship it now and it works, then we can ship it, make more money, then come back when we have more money and refactor it. And we know where to refactor, because the place that needs the most refactoring is the place with the most comments.
So what you're saying, that comments can be sort of a measuring stick to how nasty a particular piece of code might be, because it needs to be
possibly.
The code itself, it's not clear, or the intent, and so you have to add extra context. And
yes, or just identify that something is white magic. Was it? I think one of the co-founders of the Erlang language has this, because Erlang has like binary pattern matching, so it just gets really bizarre at certain points in it. And there's like one comment by one of the founding engineers that just says, "And here's where the magic happens." That was it.
I've done those type of comments before. But you also fall into a trap of if I do come back, like I ship this and then I come back and fix it, you do fall into a trap of technical debt, and like having a code base that's just a bunch of stuff thrown together. And I guess that's where Scott is coming from, because he is a practitioner of keeping things clean and tidy. I think is just obsessed with being the best. And
yeah, but
he recognizes that
sometimes
that
that's just too expensive. Like,
that's
as dirty as it is, like we were saying earlier, there are companies that just kind of put it out the door, but putting it out the door may make you like an absolutely fortune. Was it Atlassian, which is a very big company here in Australia and around the world, because they make Jira, and Jira is not well known for being a robust piece of engineering, but it got Atlassian to the point of where they now have a culture where it's like, okay, so let's make every new project not that way.
Right.
Yeah. So
and let's fix what we have.
No, but that's a good point. And I mean, the project that I feel has been my biggest disappointment, at least in terms of quality, what I was pushed into pushing out, runs most of the banking system in Puerto Rico. So it, like, the worst code that I feel I've ever written is the one that's making money, not only for whoever I wrote it, but for other people. And at the end of the day, if your perfect code is not really making anybody money, or it's not doing anything well, if your solution, if your self-contained solution is not doing meeting its purpose, then I think that's it, right? because even a car that runs badly and looks awfully and has a lot of dents and doesn't have air conditioner and have 3 different tires, but still gets you to the right place, I think that's still a good car, right? Whereas you might have a Ferrari without an engine and you cannot get anywhere.
Oh, I think the show Archer demonstrates this brilliantly, where Archer buys his Ferrari, but he loses the manual for it, so he doesn't know how to drive it. So he has someone tow it around on a flatbed.
Being someone that works on Ferraris, I can tell you that that describes a lot of Ferrari owners out there. Like, they buy the car, but they need the manual to drive around. So, Adam, you want to squid something in?
I just wanted to summarize what you guys had said and what I was going to say anyway. Basically, I think, and let me speak for Scott just for a second, because I think I know where he's coming from. I think the gist of what he is trying to say is, if you write a comment that tells you what some method or function is doing, then that's pointless. Your naming should be better. But in agreement with you guys, the why is really what's important, because that's not likely going to change. Why did I do this, or what, what's the reason for this being here? It's not how does this thing work, like you said it initially, Pablo. That's worthless. I'm looping through some stuff, who cares? But the why of, why did I choose to do this, or how does, like Mitchell said, how does this API work? Because that's not always going to be obvious. That kind of stuff is definitely valuable. One other thing I wanted to mention as well, kind of in one of the same lines that Mitchell said about some other language. Elixir, I believe, actually has comments that are runnable. That are like tests, stuff like that, so you can actually see the execution of how you're supposed to call this code and stuff like that. And I think that stuff is also valuable. Another good language that's not runnable, but that highly recommends you do things like that is PowerShell. That you can document your things with tests and examples and all that kind of stuff, and it's very much a thing that they do in that community. So I think those kinds of things are valuable to code bases, but I think his point was you shouldn't be required to have a comment, especially one that could be volatile or change a lot if you change a method or something like that. Is really what his point was. I hope it wasn't no comments ever. I think it was just,
No,
I shouldn't have to read the comment to understand what the code is doing. I think that's what he meant. So
I've developed a taste for making Scott angry, I guess. And so I'm always giving him a hard time. That's just the way we roll. But sadly, we're out of time. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you guys.
Thank you.
I hope that we can have another episode like this one in the future. And, to follow tradition, I got to say that this was the best episode ever, forever. But no, really, this was a really great episode. And I feel that we are growing. There's something that I wanted to touch that I think I want to touch on the next episode, which is and this is going to drive you crazy that we're going to talk about. I think that, is the environment, that we have in the Lambda cartel. Is it bad? Is it good? Is it conducive to us improving ourselves? Don't answer that, right? Think about it, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot ever since the start. Like, am I creating a good environment for people? Am I contributing to that? Because I'm like, that's one of my things that worries me. So we're out of time, sadly. We talk about Docker. We talked about bad developers. We talk about comments. We brought Scott and Rob up way too much, right? It's like I feel like Scott was present in the episode, even though he's not here. I think that's how strongly our bond is so far into into this journey, which by the way is going to be 2 months next week. So next episode is going to be, I guess, our 2 months celebration. It's going to be our 10th episode. So this has been Pablo Rivera as your host, Adam Wright, and Mitchell Tilbrook. And if Mitchell manages to survive another week in Australia, we will see him on the next episode. So any of you guys want to take care of the goodbye message?
Don't. It's winter, so it's winter, so all the venomous animals are like hibernating or just they're just too slow because they're all like lizards and things.
Wait, are you like, was that a Game of Thrones reference? Like winter is coming.
Well, it's good. It's really good because being in the opposite hemisphere and it comes out like in the middle of the year when winter came in the show, like winter had come in Australia.
Oh, we need to do an Australia show. That's it. Episode 11 is going to be about Australia, and so.
Oh, that made me learn about my own country. It'd be embarrassing for people to find out the fact that most of us live in these giant cities, like protected by walls. I mean, there's no walls.
Oh my god! All right, but we got to keep this short. So, thank you everybody for listening in, and this has been the Lambda Cartel podcast. Thank you for paying attention to us in this little bit while, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Jana.
Bye.